we're not endorsing any particular company, but what we wanted to do is bring together a number of different solutions for areas that importers could see what people are doing on either risk management or testing or link analysis. And there's a number of products out there from a number of different companies, so you can look at those as well.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey folks, we're back for another show with Simply Trade. And listen, we are gaining momentum. We thank you for your listenership, your viewership, your sharing, liking us, making comments. It is working very, very well. And I can't tell you how much we greatly appreciate all y'all's help in expanding our show and the network. With that, I will say that we are enjoying I guess as things are expanding, the exposure for the show. But Lalo, I got to tell you, I am really excited too with how things are going. We've said this a couple times. We've surpassed the 10,000 download mark. We're approaching 100 shows published. And so with all of that, my goodness, it's can you believe what we've been able to accomplish in a year's time frame?
Yeah, no, I know we will have, by the time this episode airs, we would have already been on our first anniversary. And we're really excited to bring this special series that we're bringing on. It's a set of shows. And as we told everybody, this is the first of several episodes on the topic of forced labor. Yeah, and so we're taking a bunch of different points of views and perspectives with forced labor from the government and the private sector, even resources like software, et cetera. And so to kick it all off, we're talking to someone in the government, which is pretty awesome that we're excited to do that. We have the director of forced labor on our show here today, and Andy, will let you introduce him. But what I wanted to say is that this will kick it all off because it'll kind of lead into all the other conversations that we'll have on forced labor, like maybe service providers that are helping importers whenever they might get flagged, and resources like software. How can I avoid this or be proactive, et cetera. So we'll talk a lot about that with Brian here. So
folks, for our listeners in particular, everybody's been talking about the forced labor or the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the U.S. You have some forced labor prevention laws and regulations that have been put in place in Canada and Mexico and Europe. And the thing is, what do you do about it? Everybody knows about these regulations. You talk about it. It scares you half to death on some of these things. You see some things that CBP has been very, very active on, which has been great. We're going to get to talk about some of that today. But with this, what we're hoping in this series is you're going to be able to not only become a bit more proficient in this particular realm, but zero in on what specific actions do you as a compliance person or a transportation person or a purchasing or legal, whatever aspect and role that you're playing, what is the action that you need to take in ensuring that your company is compliant with these laws and regulations. So with that, I'm going to say we have somebody like Lalo referred to. He's the director of Forced Labor Division out of the CBP's Office of Trade. So we're talking U.S. Customs. If you don't know what CBP, that's Customs and Border Protection. Brian Hoxie. Brian, welcome to our show. We are very excited to have you on board and looking forward to a good discussion, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today and to discuss such an important issue with you all.
You bet. With that, I will say that as we're looking at, we have had, some attorneys on. We've had, as Lalo may have mentioned off camera here, we were talking about having some software providers on trying to manage this as well, and the data flows and what. Well, you said it on camera too, didn't you? I'll tell you, my memory's as long as a turtle's tail and just as fast. Doggone it. So all that to say, we are looking through as we're going through, there's a lot of attorneys. They come in and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z and scare you half to death. And then the application comes into play is like, how in the world, with all the things that are going on, do I wait until it gets here? What do I do on the front end of this and all? So why don't we go and start first off, Brian, why don't you just give a real kind of a recap of where customs is? I mean, obviously the forced labor prevention is anti-slavery, anti-forced labor type scenarios. Okay, we get that. Why don't you start off, Brian, with what is CBP doing to take steps to implement the regulations that have been drafted or are being still drafted probably in support of the legislation of the anti-slavery, laws that are being put forward?
To kind of highlight what CBP is working on in this space, we really take two paths of how we're enforcing our it's the 1307 part of the Trade Act 1930, and we have one path where we conduct investigations and we look into entities overseas, and we do that internally, where we issue withhold release orders and findings on goods overseas that are made with forced labor, and so those goods are prohibited from being imported in the United States. So that's one path that we work. The other path that we have is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is more recent, when being signed about over a year and a half ago, but we implemented it shortly a year ago, or little more than a year ago. And that says that any goods made wholly or in part from the Xinjiang region of China, or the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, are prohibited from entry. And so what we did into the implementation of that law is we started out, as soon as the law was signed, we set up a task force internally and worked those issues and developed different policies and procedures. One of the key things to that was reaching out to all of the different stakeholders, all of the different groups in trade groups, academia, and I can't even go through all the different people that we talked to in that period. But the whole point of that is to get us to the point where this was not a completely unknown new implementation that people were going to have to react to 6 months after the signing of the law. And in that, we saw no slowdown in port congestion or supply chain issues or any of the things that we were really looking forward to trying to make sure that didn't happen. So I think that's a huge success in our efforts there. From that, we've done a number of things to help really understand the law, but then get that information out to the trade and to different stakeholders so that they can comply with the law. This includes an enormous amount of information on our public websites. We also have, and that includes importer guidance, operational guidance, and in addition to that, we have frequently asked questions and some of those sorts of things that we put out there so that we can give as much information as possible. We continue to engage with the stakeholders, many different stakeholders all across the spectrum. And I think we've had something like around 450 engagements since the start of the implementation. So if you do the quick math, that's more than one a day of the types of engagements we've been having. And that could be actually a low number, actually. And so we've really been working on making sure that we get the guidance to the importers to build up our expertise internally, and I think we've done a great job at that. And so now where we're really looking at is continuing that engagement, continuing to supply that information out there, and in terms of implementation. And so that going forward, I think we're looking at really continuing the engagement, but also working with a number of international efforts that are ongoing and providing expertise and support to that. Those efforts from the country, like-minded enforcement countries that are out there that want to learn from our implementation of the law, especially and I do want to point out, is continuing to work with our interagency partners. This is not just a CBP effort. This is a whole of government effort. We have the Department of State that we work with. We also work with the U.S. Trade Representative, our DHS colleagues, and as well as Department of Labor. So there's a number of people involved in this forced labor enforcement and ensuring that we don't have goods imported in the United States with forced labor.
Okay. With that, I will say that up to this point, one of the things I found, and I guess it's been a couple of months ago, it may be a little bit longer than that, where there was a report that showed that in 1 year's time frame, CBP had seized, I guess, $1 billion worth of goods that were, thought to have been made, or components thereof, made with forced labor. What was fascinating about that, to me, I think there was only $80 million of that came directly from China. About 400, and I may have the countries, and the two countries involved were Malaysia and Vietnam, where they were direct ships from, and like one of them had roughly 475 million, and the other one had 300 and some odd million, somewhere give or take a little of that. So the vast bulk of that, where it appears that China is making components, shipping them to other parts of the world. People are then going through and manufacturing their widgets, if you will, and the items are undergoing a substantial transformation. So it may be, as most people will use the example, maybe, bicycle parts that come together and now assembled, and it comes out as a bicycle, not a tire or not handlebars. It's the whole bicycle. With that, are you seeing that trend continue where the Uyghur region there, that northwest region of Xinjiang, as you said, is they're manufacturing items and they're shipping them to other parts, continuing on, and that are you able to catch that?
Yeah, so I think what you've really highlighted it perfectly. I think that the information that we show, and I think what you're really alluding to is that we have a public dashboard where we share our enforcement statistics on there, and you will see very clearly the countries of origin, and those are the declared countries of origin of the final goods. But what you're seeing is the wholly or in part, right? If it's wholly from Xinjiang, if it's made in the Xinjiang region and it's shipped here, it's immediately excluded. What you're seeing is that the follow-on products, because these supply chains are incredibly complex and they change, and people are looking for different opportunities, economic opportunities to use different supplies for raw materials. And then, of course, the final good, like you said, is substantially transformed into a final product. And I think it's when you can say something like it's, supply chains are complex, but I think a really good example that I like to use is, and I don't know if this is okay, but I'm going to mention another podcast that did a story about this.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. This is not one of those where like, oh, no. It's like, hey, we're all in the same boat. It's fine. So go for it. And matter of fact, maybe it'll help boost their ratings too.
Yeah, we'll see. The Planet Money podcast did a story probably about 10 years ago now, and there was a book that somebody wrote about supply chains, and I think or maybe it was an article, but it was the life of a T-shirt, a simple T-shirt. I mean, if you think about it, it's such a basic commodity. There's not really much to it. It's cotton, and there might be some dye in there. But if you follow the supply chain of where the cotton is grown to where the yarn is milled and then made into cloth and then dyed, and then they followed a specific T-shirt that they built, and it went through 5 or 6 different countries before it came to the United States. And that's what we see throughout the different supply chains in all of the different products that we're looking at, and the entities that we're looking at that make these products. So we're really trying to I think with that dashboard, we're showing that is what's happening. Is they just like you said, there's a substantial transformation of the different products and pieces for the raw materials that are coming out of the Xinjiang region, and those are prohibited. So that is why understanding the supply chains and knowing your supply chain, getting ahead of that before you get detained at the port is so important. And there's nobody better to understand their supply chains than the people, the actual manufacturers and producers of these goods. So that's one of the things that we continue to emphasize is that know your supply chain, be ready for a detention before it occurs, and have that documentation ready.
All right, Brian, you're hitting something that we've talked about a little bit, but let's stop for just a second. I want to address for our listeners. Listen to what Brian is saying. What CBP is expecting you to do is know your supply chain. That doesn't mean that it's like, well, hey, I just ordered it, it's showing up, I assumed it was this, or I'm letting somebody else take care of it. You've got to show due diligence and go through and check out your supply chain. So with that, I'm going to challenge our listeners in that if you're in the compliance area, reach out to your purchasing and sourcing group. If you're in that purchasing and sourcing group, you've got to reach out to your compliance side as well as your transportation logistics. All of you need to work as a team to go through and vet your appropriate parties to the transactions, the manufacturers, going all the way through it. If you've got any wood products, I'm going to throw in a little curveball here. Something that came up at one of the conferences we were just at. I talked to a USDA person. Well, that winds up being part of the Lacey Act. Well, that's another thing that comes in here is like wood products, and CBP gets challenged through the ag officers, if you will, that are working with CBP and so folks, you got to know where these things are coming from. And we're talking the origin of the species, the origin of the cotton. You just mentioned is a great example, Brian, of the life cycle of a T-shirt that show. We'll have to look to see maybe it's time for an update on that one because that is excellent. But all right, saying all that, I need to correct something too. I was saying Xinjiang, it's Xinjiang. So it's like, and Brian, you're correctly referencing. I'm dumb as a box of rocks, so I got it all screwed up here. Lalo, what were you going to say there, bud?
I was just going to say, I guess this is also, do I really need to be in CTPAT? And I'm not saying everybody needs to be or should go through CTPAT. The best answer that we usually give is, well, even if you're not, you should be a good corporate citizen in general and follow a lot of those things that are mandated or controlled or, in the CTPAT, in the sense that just like Brian and you, Andy, said, it's know your suppliers. I mean, that is obviously the biggest thing for CTPAT, know your suppliers. And not necessarily, I mean, the CTPAT was back in the day was created because of the threat on America and products coming into the United States and, just trying to avoid a mass destruction, whatever, but in this case, I know forced labor has also been added and been contemplated into CTPAT. But I guess just in general, what I was just trying to say is be a good corporate citizen. Just make sure that you do vet your suppliers. It's like you said, Andy. Well, I mean, I know their address is in Vietnam, or whatever, even Mexico, right? I mean, we've heard clients tell us, it's coming through Mexico is not a big deal. Their factory is right across the border. I know it is, but it doesn't mean that it's safe, or I shouldn't say safe, but it's not forced labor. So,
and all said and done, that's where the raw goods are coming in. So this is where the issue is that in that scenario, it's components that are made with forced labor that are getting incorporated into, a widget, whether it's electronics, whether it's a garment, whether it's, whatever the widget may be. But Brian, you're hitting on something again that I guess I look at that I think is phenomenal when it comes around. I happened to talk to a good friend that last night. She is Kelly Peachy, and she was working within her company to literally train some people and talk to them and say, okay, how to conduct yourself. This is in preliminary. They're not being audited, but it's like just as a preliminary. So know your supply chain, but also, know how to do your, and in her cases, what she was pushing forward is how to conduct yourself in meetings during a customs audit and things of that nature. Well, part of the thing that I would say, I'm going to flip this around a little bit. Brian, when your team goes out, and there are some fine folks at CBP, and there's a lot of information, you do research. You've already said you're checking out parties, if you will, entities, parties, and individuals, whatever, overseas, and checking things out, so that as things are coming through, and all of a sudden a name pops up with this or that or whatever, there's going to be shipments that'll be flagged, and it's like, well, that you may have checked somebody out months ago or weeks ago, but you did your homework and you now have a red flag in there or something worth looking at. Okay, great. When your team goes through and is looking at situations, when you approach a company, what would be an ideal scenario that a company can say, this is a great way for me to show the due diligence, and that I'm active in trying to, be compliant and all that. What would you like to see in that kind of scenario?
So the simplest phrase, I think, for what we use on that is a supply tracing report. So it shows from, you've got, like we said, that we'll use the example of a T-shirt. However, I know, and by the way, if anybody's involved in textiles, I know there's a couple little nuances with textiles, but we'll just keep it simple. There's a nuance in all trade processing, yes, just to be fair. But,
yeah, well, it's what I call but.
Exactly. Or as what's the legal term? It depends. So we definitely do. We look at a supply chain tracing report. So, for instance, what you're looking at is you've made a T-shirt. So where did you buy the cloth from, and can that producer tell you where the yarn was milled, and then going on down to where the cotton was actually grown? And so I bring that up because cotton is one of the areas in the Xinjiang region that we've seen where the Uyghurs are being forced to pick cotton. I think I read in a report it's a cure for laziness and drunkardism. It's they're really using this, forcing these people to do this labor on things simple as cotton. And those products will make it into not just shirts, but you can think of a plethora of products that come across our borders that have cotton products in them. So
even cotton balls, as simple as it is, I mean, the cotton balls themselves, as people know. All right. So,
right. So if you have really what we want is a complete verification package that we can look at to show and trace all the way through that particular product, how it was put together. And so if you have multiple different areas within that product, you want to look for the areas that are highest risk. So if you see things like cotton, you see things like polysilicon, these are things that we put out in one of our strategies as priority areas. You could then, if you had to start doing risk management, you start looking at those areas. Some other things that you can do is use information that's out there publicly available through our partners in the government, as well as in academia, as in the NGOs out there, the non-governmental organizations. They produce information on risk in different supply chains. So you can start using that information to then start putting together your case, right? To basically give us a story of where each one of those different pieces came from. We have a document on our website. It's called Best Practices, and it's in our UFLPA website. It's and if you look in that, it's a pretty short document. It's only about 3 pages long, but in there we specifically talk about some of the different documentation that you want to have available. So you're looking for like the documentation. Get this documentation early, first of all, but we're looking at shipment records, transportation records. There's different purchasing records and things that basically show that if you buy X amount that goes into this particular good, it needs to make sense. And like I said, I'm speaking in a lot of generalities because we're responsible for enforcing across the entire 97 chapters of the tariff schedule. And the people that know their supply chains best are the people that work in these industries and that produce these goods and purchase these goods. So they really would know the supply chain specs and be able to build those tracing documents and be able to provide that to us when requested.
Okay, so with that, again, let me just stop for a second. So, folks, if you're listening to this, again, this is one that, first off, I'm going to tell you, you need to, save this podcast. You probably need to listen to it and send it to some others to listen to, especially even executive management, because from a standpoint here is listen to the scenario here. One, when you are getting a new vendor or a customer or a supplier or a distributor or whatever, you need to be doing the vetting of those people. And, you're going to hit them against the denied party screening, the restricted party screening and all that. Well, then you also have to take it a step further and look to see, are they potentially involved in any, forced labor scenarios? That's one thing. Taking it a step further with Brian, I'm glad that you were talking about it, but the thing that I'm picking up on is not only should you be vetting the parties you're doing business with up the chain and down the chain, is also vetting the product itself. What are the components of that product? Where did it come from? The origin and all that, and reverse engineering all the way back and keep digging. Well, I can't get that from the supplier. Well, you're going to have to, because you're going to have to get in there and do a joint effort in that scenario to get it down to where to be in full compliance. So I would say, and the other thing that you made mention, that document. So folks, listen to what he's got here. Brian mentions is that CBP has a best practices document. That is for forced labor. Now we're getting into the details of what should you have? What's it going to take? And it's not just a case, well, let me just go check off the list. You look at what he just mentioned, you better take the time and start putting things together. It's going to be your data systems need to be in there, your documents themselves, and how you check things out, so that if somebody were from CBP to come into a company, and if they said, well, yeah, here's how we did this, and you're able to pull together representatives from the different areas, again, purchasing, IT, logistics, supply chain, all those different compliance, all that. And they're sitting there talking, yeah, this is how we vet this. This is what we did here. This is what we did with this customer. This is what we did with this supplier. That kind of scenario is going to show where that company is serious about trying to be in compliance. And with that, would that not come across as a positive for your personnel?
Yeah, definitely be a positive. I got to say that, one of the things, one of the best practices that we learned is when the company is really ahead of the game and they've done their due diligence, right? If you start doing your due diligence when we detain your goods, it's too late, right? And getting ahead of it early and making sure that you make those connections not only reduces your risk, but it also enables you, if you are detained, to have the information available that we're going to require to potentially clear those goods. And so we've seen that when those companies are actually ahead of the game and they're working with, particularly with your center of excellence and expertise. Those are we have 10 of those around the country that are organized by commodity. But when you work with your center and you establish that communication and you give them the information when requested quickly, you're going to see a quicker return on a decision of whether to release those goods. And if you've done your due diligence and you know there's no forced labor in that supply chain, then it's potentially good for you as well, because you can get your goods into commerce a little quicker. So a couple areas that that I didn't actually mention, but we do have our entity list with the DHS entity list. Those are a list of companies that are prohibited from import into the United States, so they'll be immediately excluded. And if any company is using in a downward supply chain using materials from those are also subject, right? Because like I said, it's wholly or in part. We also have a lot of this stuff is all free. All right. This is stuff we've put out on the web. So and on that, you could even say a simple Google search is actually a good way to start, because companies will have information about their efforts to address social compliance issues. There are companies in China that have been proud of their poverty alleviation program participation, right? Which is code word for we use forced labor. We use Uyghur forced labor, forced transfers of labor within China. So there's a number of those areas. Like I said, the State Department has a listing of information on forced labor. The Department of Labor has a comply chain as well, which is a step-by-step risk management framework that you can look through and start making decisions early. They also have a list of goods that are made with forced labor that they publish each year. And on top of all of that, right, we've got, the information that I told you about on if you actually get detained by customs. And the last thing I'll mention is on technology. I know that there's a lot of talk about technology and areas to do risk management. So we held a forced labor technical expo in March of this year, and the videos from that are still online, I believe, that you can go and watch. But those are different. We're not endorsing any particular company, but what we wanted to do is bring together a number of different solutions for areas that importers could see what people are doing on either risk management or testing or link analysis. And there's a number of products out there from a number of different companies, so you can look at those as well. Mm-hmm.
Outstanding. I got to tell you, we can keep on with this, but we're going to need to try and wrap up here on some things. I will say, though, let me go back and kind of do a recap for folks, because I'm going to tell you, Brian, this is one of those, I think it would be great to do some more follow-up on this at some point as we're looking through. But I got to tell you, you've hit on a lot of things. One, again, is the vetting of you're checking out different entities, different individuals and all that. Here's a question on that. If I am a compliance person or at a company or whatever, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I found a good source for making a widget. Is there something that CBP would like to say, all right, if I'm working through this, or should they work through their C? I don't know, to say, here's this entity. This is a new potential supplier. I'm checking things out. I can't find anything on it. But is there a way for us to be able to maybe offer some information and who we're dealing with to somebody within CBP, and they can look at it and go, red flags, or no, it looks good, or whatever?
Yeah, it's difficult, I think, for us to do that in a couple of different respects. I think one is that, like I said, there's so many different areas about across the different tariff schedule that, there may be something we have no experience in, at least from my perspectives. And so then we send to the C. The centers are pretty busy right now as it is. I would say that they are definitely your area to your number one person to call. But I think it really comes down to, again, just doing the due diligence, focusing on that information. And I think one of the things that we see that we've seen a couple times now is I can't get information out of China. They won't give it to me. Or the company is unwilling to give me the information, period, for whatever reason. Those, to me, I think, that's not going to be sufficient to say, well, we've got everything up until this point, but I'm sorry, we can't find the rest of the information and from this Chinese supplier. That's going to be very difficult for us to make a decision on, because we don't have the entire supply chain that we're looking at. So if you see those sorts of things, I think that might be an area where you might want to see how you can get additional information on the company if they're not able to provide it. But again, just keep working on going down the path until you find areas that you can actually validate and say, yeah, we're good with this.
Well, I was just going to say, you're hitting a good point. So I need to stop for a second, because on this is that up to a certain point, there would be a case, well, the supplier won't provide it to me because they're worried that, all right, it's a distributor. I'm not going to reveal my source. But in this case, you have to get that. So as it's going through, part of the scenario, if somebody is reluctant to share, the details and the information, the other side of that is, you know what, you might want to be looking for a different source, because, yeah, they're offering you a really good price. Is the price of that transaction worth the risk of losing the whole shipment? Because that's the other thing in this is, like, let's take those T-shirts. Let's say, for example, and I believe this actually happened, it was some men's shirts, but it wound up coming out of Mexico. It was a large truck load of men's shirts that had been manufactured, and Customs did an inspection on it, did a sampling, and found that the cotton was grown in the Uyghur region, in the Xinjiang region. And guess what? that whole thing got seized. So the scenario there is, if you are a sourcing or purchasing person, or you're moving forward and it's like, well, I just can't get it, and then the goods come through and they're at the border, get seized, now you're going to have to go to upper management and say, well, they just wouldn't give us the information and you're out that money. You're going to have that's going to be a tough communique to the upper management, the ranks there. So
I just, want to go back just a little bit on that and say that, I'm right. I can't give advice to how a company is going to run their business and do the risk management, right? We're looking to be able to trace those materials back and have confidence that that's not made with forced labor. So, in the decisions that the companies need to make, I think is right. It's part of risk management, I think, overall. And we're trying to, not trying, we've provided a number of different resources and materials for people to use in order to help with that.
Well, continuing on, I mean, it's like, as you're vetting the parties, people need to do the due diligence and properly vet not only the entities, but also at the product level and trace that back. So you're going to probably need to have a task force within your company to, go through and do the proper, searches and vetting and all that. The other thing is keeping up with the enforcement stats on your dashboard and the information that you're supplying on your CBP websites. Sounds excellent. The best practices, that is a vital document, I think, that would be well worth it. Establishing a good working relationship with your C and reviewing that DHS entity list that's folks that are denied that have shown to be problematic with forced labor. So that's a lot of things. Anything else that you can think of to, the nugget of knowledge or action that somebody should take?
No, I think that's it. I think it's just start early, don't wait, and do I think one thing that we're trying to emphasize is that you don't have to. You just need to get started. Any amount of due diligence is better than nothing. And I think that, working through some of the materials that we have, working through that process, doing your reasonable care, doing your due diligence, just continually work on that and strengthen that. It's just not going to be a bad thing. If you ever get detained, then you've got something that you can start with. You don't want to start from zero, right? And like I said, we've seen people that have been ahead of the game, and they've been able to get their stuff cleared a little bit faster. So I just going to keep reiterating that one.
It's really a common sense, simplistic plan, but at the same time, if you go through and do these types of things, and like you said, don't wait. And get this information together early, and it's going to be like a living document on some of these things, and as you refine your procedures. But that whole plan of being compliant with this is going to be like a shiny new penny that you get to hold on to, and it's like, there you go. So, okay, Brian. Again, thank you so much, sir. To you and your CBP colleagues there, great group of folks. I've had opportunity. A lot of them have retired. Lalo and I, if I can say it, have known a lot of folks. Well, they're getting retired and shoved out to pasture there. So it's like, all right, the new crew's coming in, and it's like, we're older than dirt. So it's like, it's like, well, just us relics here, just wave at us and pat us on the head and keep going. But hey, seriously, to the CBP folks, man, hang in there. I know y'all are dealing with some stuff, a lot of different things, but we greatly appreciate what you're doing and going through. And again, Brian, to you and your team, great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely appreciate that. And thank you for having me on the show. This is good to talk about and get more people out there to hear about the mission.
Sure. And what I was going to say is I'll either reach out to you or your staff there and get some of those links. But I do have quite a few links. I have all the links. I constantly watch the links of the replays of that March show. The only reason is we were not there is because we were at another event. But I mean, for some reason, two of the biggest events in customs actually culminated in those 2 to 3 days. It was crazy. But anyway, so But I do have links for that. Everybody look in your show notes for that. Look at the show notes for that document that Brian referred to, and a bunch of other stuff that I'll gather resources for you all. And we talked to someone at CBP at GTech, right, Andy? And she said, actually, she was from BIS. She said, our job is to inform you, the public. We're not keeping it for ourselves. It's not a secret, and so we're more than glad to give that information out. And so that's what we'll do. We'll get as much as we can. And like Brian said, it's not a secret. It's there.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that.
All right, folks, one more time, download this podcast and keep us, in your minds here as far as come back and listen to this several times. So with that, we greatly appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.